This is the end of my re-election campaign.
Mayor Eric Adams drops out of the mayoral race for re-election, and we're going to discuss why. But first, he leaves us with a warning.
Too often, insidious forces use local government to advance divisive agendas with little regard for how it hurts everyday New Yorkers. Major change is welcome and necessary, but beware of those who claim the answer to destroy the very system we built together over generations. That is not change, that is chaos.
I'm going to be your reporter today. I'm Ian McMahon, and we're going to talk with my friend, Troy M. Olson, author and veteran and legislative director at New York City Hall. We're going to discuss the political collapse of Eric Adams.
So him deciding that he isn't going to be a Democrat, isn't also going to be a Republican, that to me really said you should just not run for re-election, because then you would have allowed at least the rest of the city and interested parties to maybe come up with a plan to avoid Mamdani. None of that, and there's not any time for that now. And none of that happened. And Adams, I think he's definitely failed policy-wise, but he's failed politically.
I want to know why Eric Adams lost his coalition. He pulled through in the open primary against a formidable field of candidates after the end of de Blasio's second term. How did he pull through, and why has that all crumbled now?
I think fundamentally it's crumbled because of performance. His first term, what appears like his only term now, just did not go well. Some of that was his fault. I think a lot of it was events beyond his control, though. The illegal migrant crisis foisted on the country by President Biden, that he was one of the few Democrats to be a semblance of intellectual honesty about. I think the downstream effects of that have really crushed the city and wiped out most of the crime, anti-crime progress that he made. Not that he made a ton, but we weren't in 2019, 2020, 2021 COVID era no holds bar crime waves. It was not getting worse. I think the quality of life was still taking hits and persistently staying there, but the violent crime rates did level off or went down in some ways. And his first budget was a crime combating budget. He had allies in that first year, but I think fundamentally he didn't do a very good job of things beyond his control nationally with his own party, a party that he doesn't really belong in anymore, to be honest.
Yeah,
and a lot of his supporters don't either. So
I see a lot of people are blaming Eric Adams for the rise of Zohran Mamdani, and I'm hesitant to do that because I think it's not fair. I think that Adams was operating in a larger political climate where his whole party was trending to the left.
Yeah.
And he had in many ways a hostile city council that was radically progressive and remains to be and will be more so.
Yep.
And he didn't. The one thing I will say that was within his power that he failed to do was that he did not maintain his coalition. It seemed like he was spending too much time partying at zero bond, and not enough time really checking in and maintaining his base of support, and it just continued to dwindle. So what I'd like for you to do is I want to touch on both sides of this coin, but first, will you talk about his coalition leading into the primary after de Blasio in 2021, how that pulled him over the finish line, and then what did he fail to do to maintain that coalition, or how did it fade away?
Well, I think his coalition was kind of three groups in the primary. Everything after that was just, obviously the progressives behind him for the general, and it was a one-on-one race. But he had strong support from the Black community, not monolithic support though, but he was the top person there, their top choice, and That goes a long ways, especially in Democratic politics in a primary. If you look throughout the city, especially with the rules of ranked choice voting, that was one. He also was pretty strong with Orthodox Jewish community. So he's got a very Brooklyn strong, heavy, but arguably just outer boroughs strong coalition right off the bat. Even if he's only clearing 35, 40%, if your outer boroughs unite against Manhattan, that candidate can win. Obviously, he doesn't hold Staten Island and places like that for the general, but that didn't matter because he's then going to get the Manhattan vote. Mamdani's coalition's flipped of that, actually. Everywhere where Adams was weak from the start, Mamdani was strongest in. So the Adams coalition has to hold together the Black community big time. Like, he can't bleed any support there. Orthodox Jewish community, and then just fundamentally the political moderates of the city. That's who he had to hold together. He was never getting like hardcore Republicans. Hardcore Republicans voted for Curtis Sliwa 4 years ago. Most of them were going to vote for Curtis Sliwa again. And so he wasn't really going to add those voters unless he did something and that took a page from history or created some new history. Hopefully that answers the question. How did that coalition fall apart?
Yeah, how did that slip away?
My first part answered it big time. His first term did not go well. In terms of mining his coalition, I think lip service wise, he did a fair amount of trying to understand where his coalition was, but on actual policy, not so much. I'll give an example. City of Yes initiatives. Maybe that was good for his donors that he had, but City of Yes is a huge middle finger from City Hall and city planning to the outer boroughs, the same outer boroughs that elected him. And it takes more and more power on land use and zoning out of the community, out of the neighborhoods, and puts it towards City Hall. And the auspice of doing it is we're combating the housing crisis. Well, you just got beat more or less by a coalition who talks about the housing crisis every other sentence. I feel like every mayor is going to get elected and defeated on this housing issue, it seems, although I would argue they're all sort of missing the issue. That being said, though, his policies just were not curbing the decline of the city, which really started under de Blasio. And it's maybe slowed down. I think Adams, wrong guy, wrong time. Right guy, right time at first, for the first, the initial election, let's say. Everyone was ready to turn the page on de Blasio. But as the years went along, he did not go to bat for the allies he possibly could have had that wanted to work with him. He needed to do more for people who actually wanted him to succeed. And he didn't do that. And so politically, I think policy-wise, his mayor term has been, very much a D rating. But the politics has probably been even worse at a lot of the times. So he played the part of mayor. He can give a speech as if he's the mayor of New York City. And that's actually something that I don't think Mamdani will ever be able to do. I don't think Mamdani will ever command any actual real respect with FDNY, NYPD, DSNY, any of the core agencies that make this city go. Adams probably that's probably the last part of his coalition. Adams probably still had that core 4 agency support. He certainly had the unions of them. I understand why they were in it till the end. It just didn't work out. He just didn't have, the numbers weren't there. It became futile. He probably should have realized that it was futile before the re-election even started.
Well, why don't you tell me about that? That it seems like that he was the last person to accept that he wasn't going to be able to make it. The polling was already underwater even before the primaries, yet he persisted to stay in. And this is where I'm going to take the angle that he failed in his leadership to recognize that it was no longer his time. Yeah. And this is, and I want to touch on why things beyond his control contributed to this. But I think fundamentally he failed at what he could control. He'd let his coalitions get away from him. And then when it became evident that he wasn't going to have that same support going into this, he's stuck with going into the primary and boxing out possible alternatives.
Yep.
So would you speak on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's only one real example that you could pull from history, and ironically, it's tied to our club. John Lindsay was not going to get the support of his own party that first elected him as mayor of New York. He had the Liberal Party line, and he had to basically be reelected without the Republican line in '69. He was able to get reelected. Bloomberg, independent billionaire, was able to get reelected, but he had twice been elected as a Republican. Adams he wasn't going to actually be in the Democratic primary if he said, I'm John Lindsay for the Democratic Party. He needed to have some sort of alternate theory of the case on how he was going to get reelected mayor. And to me, that bold stroke actually would have been to switch parties, because you would be able to assess from a defined contest early in the calendar, which would be the Republican primary that didn't ever actually happen. He would have either won or lost that. And from there, he could have been whatever candidate he was going to be. If he loses it, no change. The nominee is Curtis Sliwa. But if he wins it, he then says, I'm the John Lindsay of this time. I'm going to now try to bring as much of my coalition over here. Maybe that doesn't work either, but that's at least a little bit more creative than what was attempted, which was sort of like nothing.
Yeah, there was no plan, and I love how Curtis Sliwa calls him the swag of Mayo with no plan.
Yeah,
and so true. It's he kind of just flowed in, hoping that somehow the world would just magically shift without him doing anything into his favor. Evidently that didn't happen. He just quit today because he ran out of money, essentially.
Yeah.
Do you think he just ran out of money? It wasn't even like that he was pressured out?
I think he was hoping to coast on name ID initially, perhaps, and power of incumbency. But New York City's trending in such a dysfunctional decline direction, that I don't think being an incumbent is really a great advantage for the mayor position. It might be for individual council seats and positions like that, but for the top job where you are the top elected official in the city, I don't think it's some great advantage at this point. Most people are incredibly dissatisfied with the direction of the city, so being the change candidate is going to give you an advantage. He had the wins going in his favor for his first election. Biden was president. It maybe keeps the progressive activists a little bit at bay. They were also split between two candidates. None of those wins, none of those things were going on this time. There were many progressive candidates out there this time again, but they were coordinating a lot more closely and linking arms together. Brad Lander people put Memdani number 2. Memdani people put Brad Lander, there was a lot more coordination this time to actually have a progressive come out of that Democratic primary. And even Adams didn't even enter that primary. So there wasn't even a moderate standard bearer at all. So him deciding that he isn't going to be a Democrat, isn't also going to be a Republican, that to me really said you should just not run for re-election, because then you would have allowed at least the rest of the city and interested parties to maybe come up with a plan to avoid Memdani. None of that, and there's not any time for that now. And none of that happened. And Adams, I think he's definitely failed policy-wise, but he's failed politically. Wrong place, wrong time, a lot of that. But he's definitely a creature of the post-Blasio era, a moment in time that is already gone, because moderates just don't have a window or a lane in the Democratic Party anymore, at least not in major cities.
Well, I want you to speak on that. That's a perfect way we can segue into the next point, is that the New York City Democrat Party moderates are, as some might say, are in a state of denial. They they haven't yet recognized the power behind the Mamdani phenomenon, and they're tacitly waiting for all the Adams supporters and even many of the Republicans to just jump behind Cuomo without any effort on their part to entice us. So
Yeah.
why don't you speak on that?
Yeah, I think that the moderates are in a state of denial on this. They resemble Adams in that they don't really have a plan. So at the end of the day, you can, it's Adams is the leader. It's easy to rip on him, but I think he's kind of a character of what's happened to establishment and moderate, more middle of the road politics in this city. There's no lane for it. It's totally ossified. It's institutions broken, and the institutions that are out there are saying go to Cuomo, go to Cuomo. But think of the ask of the average Republican in the city. You're basically giving them the choice of a communist, Islamist, Marxist, and a guy who said never leave your home ever again for political reasons.
And
Because
he's also the architect of bail reform in the
yeah,
state.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Adams is at least partially responsible for the state of the city. Cuomo definitely is. He was governor for a decade, basically, in the 2010s, and really the governor has a lot of influence over the city. Um, you know, you can turn around the city with a great mayor, but you can turn around the city with a great governor too. He was not a great governor. He was not a decent governor even. It was a bad term, and he signed every progressive post 2018. He signed every progressive criminal justice reform piece of legislation sent his way, and that began even prior to COVID hitting the rise of crime. The crime wave of the turn of the decade is absolutely has its roots in bail reform, and then the fuel on that fire was COVID and everyone being cooped up, I think, and it's the loss of moral standards and cultural standards across the city and country, really. Um, so that's what got us to this point. I think Cuomo absolutely, between corruption and fundamental outcomes, why should people vote for Adams if they're Republican? Why should people vote for Cuomo if they're Republican? They've not done anything to earn these votes. And so they don't have any theory of the case.
Would it be accurate to say that the Democrat moderates in the city are truly trying to rely on Republicans to vote for Cuomo to beat Mamdani, or is that hyperbole?
No, they totally are. They're asking. They not even asking. They're assuming that if we can just bully Sliwa out of the race, that we could have a chance, right? A puncher's chance. And on the front end, that's terrible math. There is no anti-Mamdani voter. That's not how math and polling works. If he's at 45 and three other candidates add up to 55, you're not going to win 55-45. What's going to happen is as one candidate drops out, some of those numbers will trickle to non-voting or to some other candidate. A point or two will even go to Mamdani himself, getting him closer to 50% plus one, which is all he would need. So that's it's faulty on that level. It's also faulty on the level of if the Republican vote, which is currently split between three candidates, Sliwa, Adams, and Cuomo, if that vote consolidated behind anyone, but in this case, let's say the Republican nominee Sliwa would be actually in a strong second place. And then it would be up to the Republicans to say to the Cuomo moderates, why don't you join us here? Why don't you join us? This is the only guy not responsible for the state of this city, both in a policy sense and certainly not in a political sense. Sliwa is the Republican candidate, and the sin of the Republicans in this city is not running an actual contest and not party building. I think that's a totally acceptable complaint that I will own completely, and we have to do a better job of that. But what they're asking for is nothing to do with that. They are really assuming that they have ownership over Republican votes. It's absolutely insulting. It's an unserious theory of the case. What would be really, really interesting is if the Republican vote could consolidate behind Sliwa. If you put him into second, I don't think this will happen, by the way, but if it did, then the argument a Republican could make to a Cuomo moderate is actually much, much stronger, because he already failed to defeat Mamdani once. It was the primary, and he's going to fail again. I have no doubt of that. I have no faith Andrew Cuomo can pull this off.
Okay, so now that we've both agreed that the situation is hopeless and that it's very much likely that Mamdani will pull through and win. I mean, I don't see any way out of it. What is the pitch of the Republican Party to the moderates? Or I want to phrase this sort of in a nonpartisan way, just for both Democrats and Republican. What is the pitch of the moderates in this city to try to get away from this extreme lurch that we've had towards Democratic social progressives?
Yeah, I think the pitch is, one, you've lost your party. You're not going to get it back. You don't have a plan to get it back. There is another available alternative. You try to build some independent thing is not going to work. There is an alternative that could use some party building, could use some expertise, could use some institutional help, some institutional dollars. And it's the other party in the system. And I get people's reluctance to, in the Trump era, if they're part of that social circle, if they want to keep getting invited to their wine and cheese parties or whatever they're doing, I get their reluctance, but I'm sorry, they're not getting their party back. And there would be an opportunity to build out a big tent grand coalition alternative over the next 4 years that I think would, I think what the Republican would have to give that moderate is, if you're not a national Republican, we respect that. This is a local and very specific thing that we're trying to do here. And it's about the city, and it's about the future of New York City. If you don't want to be a Republican at the state and national level, fine. But for purposes of this election, where 1 out of 5, at best 1 out of every 4 New Yorkers are turning out, for the state of this, our day-to-day life that actually affects us most clearly in local politics, quality of life, crime, join us, and they'll have not just the influence that they think they still have, but really don't, but they'll have also what presumably they want, which is to prevent a Mayor Mamdani, or if he wins, prevent the worst effects of Mayor Mamdani by building up an institutional alternative that can win and prevent him from winning again, or anyone like him winning again.
Well, we can be hopeful. Before I wrap this up, do you think that what we covered was a good enough snapshot of the autopsy of the Adams campaign and a way forward?
Yeah,
would you add anything?
I think so. I just want to add that I think he did a good thing doing this. It came too late, but I want to give one nod to one thing that he was able to do, that even de Blasio was able to do, that I don't believe a Mayor Mamdani would ever be able to do. And which was, when something tragic happened in this city, whether it's he was able to go up there and give a talk and actually sound like a compassionate person, and it wasn't inauthentic. Obviously de Blasio is not a veteran, but his dad was a veteran of World War II, and during Veterans Breakfast, he was able to at least rely on that anecdote. Eric Adams, Mayor Adams, has an uncle that was killed in Vietnam War. He's able to pull from his life, and it was real. Zohran Mamdani will have nothing like that. I don't even know if he'll have a veterans breakfast. And when a cop is inevitably, sadly and tragically, because it's a very dangerous city, when they are killed, if he's mayor, he's only going to make things worse with every step and move that he makes, and we know that. So the basic day-to-day maintenance and good order of the city is going to go from bad, which it is under Adams, to worse under Zoran Mamdani. And the only real chance to avoid the worst of the worst is a federal takeover of New York City, at least in a security sense, to restore basic order, good order.
Well, that sounds like an entire topic that you just
Yeah.
opened up. I mean, could you speak on that?
Well, you're seeing it in these other cities, and we'll cover it on CityCon extensively. I don't think it'll happen in New York City until closer to the midterms in 2026. I think the administration's building up to that, but I'm very worried about people's day-to-day basic security and the security situation that we'll face here in the city next year. So whatever you think is extreme today, it will be a whole nother level next year. Because New York City, which we used to call it the safest big city in the world, one of the reasons that is so is because there has been a pretty robust security system institutionally to the NYPD. And this doesn't mean that everyone's perfect or that everything cops does are just right. That's not what this is about. It's that there is a history and a support in place that a successful Democrat in the city acknowledges, which is we support our police, we support fire, we support sanitation workers, we support corrections officers. Not every Democrat's like that anymore. The progressive Democrats certainly are not like that. And when they try to be like that, it's fake and you can see it a mile away. So having that basic core four pulled out from under our feet absolutely could happen. I think it might happen next year. And that will be the day-to-day security madness. And only the federal government would be able to sort of restore a semblance of order if worse hit worse. I also think there'll be an escalating fiscal crisis in the city each successive year into Mamdani's term if he wins. His first budget will be lavish spending, but every budget after that, he'll have to chase after more and more taxes, which will almost definitely be hit on the middle class in the outer boroughs who are already stretched very, very thin.